The truth is, with the salary of 2 junior analysts, we can keep the operation running and still significantly reduce the payroll, Larry," said Brent Edwards, pushing the resignation letter toward me with the same calm as serving a cup of coffee. "My name is Larry Swinford. I'm 56 years old, and until yesterday I was a senior employee at Titan Core Solutions. I had worked there for 22 long years, more than 2 decades to be exact. I started when I was young, full of dreams and the energy of someone starting to understand the market. But over time, Titan Core became my home. I was part of the company's growth. I saw it expand, establish itself as a leader in the industry. I saw colleagues retire and new faces come in. The company had always been more than just a job to me. It was at the center of everything I built in my professional life. But like all great stories, mine at Titan Core was about to change. I didn't know at the time that my journey there had already come to an end. Everything was about to crumble in a way I could never have imagined, in a way that would teach me more about people, values, and what really matters in the end. Detroit was gray that day, with the sky tinged leaden and a fine drizzle that seemed to hesitate between falling or just hovering in the air, as if the city itself felt that something was about to happen. The kind of morning that makes everything slower, heavier, as if even time was in a hurry to run away from something. I arrived at the Titan Core Solutions headquarters at 8:15 a.m. sharp, as I had for 22 years. I parked in the same corner of the basement where I always left my car and greeted the security guard with a distracted wave. He smiled, but with a certain sorrow in his eyes. I didn't notice at the time. Only later, when everything had turned to smoke, I took the elevator up to the 27th floor, the constant hum of the lift reminding me of the passage of time. I had gotten used to every sound in that building. The click of hurried heels, muffled voices in the halls, the rumble of the old air conditioner. It was like a second home. A home that, I discovered later, was never really mine. My name appeared in an email with the subject, "Urgent Meeting, Brent Edwards." No context, no explanation. It was unusual, but not exactly alarming. Not yet. Brent and I were close enough that he'd call me on the extension when he needed to talk about something important. The dry email was already a bad sign. I entered the meeting room at 9:17 a.m. as requested. It was a glass-walled room with a view of Detroit's industrial landscape, and that cold morning light flooded the space like a sharp blade. Brent was there, sitting with his hands clasped on the table. Next to him, to my surprise, was Carla Jensen, the HR director. And then, the alarm went off, loud and inevitable inside me. "Hi, Larry," said Brent, his voice low, almost cautious. "Please, sit down." "Sure," I replied, trying to disguise the knot that was forming in my throat. "What's going on? Did some big client back out?" He didn't answer right away. He threw a quick glance at Carla, who adjusted her glasses and looked away, as if the whole scene was too uncomfortable for her. Brent then took a deep breath. And then it came. "Larry, this is a tough conversation," he started. "I want you to know that this has nothing to do with your performance or dedication. You've always been exceptional, and it's precisely because of that that this decision weighs so heavily on me." The world stopped. Each of his syllables seemed to come from underwater, distant and in slow motion. "We're going through a restructuring," he continued. "We need to cut costs. The board was clear. We need to be more efficient with fewer resources. And, well, with 2 younger employees, we can keep the workflow going and reduce the payroll by nearly 40%. My mind tried to process. What he was saying didn't make sense. I was the architect behind the company's biggest contracts. I created processes, training, implemented systems. I was literally the one teaching those 2 junior employees how not to sink an account. "So that's it?" I asked, more to myself than to him. 22 years. And I'm redundant? Brent leaned back in his chair. Carla cleared her throat as if she wanted to help but knew there was no way to sugarcoat that pill. "It's not personal, Larry. You know that." "Not personal." I wanted to laugh, and I did. But it was that dry laugh, the kind that comes from the stomach when the pain is too big to come out as tears. The room fell silent. "You know what's funny, Brent?" I said, standing up slowly. "I saw this coming. Not exactly like this. But I knew. The way you cut the budget for my team, the unscheduled meetings, the forced smiles. You've been preparing this for weeks, maybe months." He furrowed his brow, uncomfortable. Carla tried to soften it. "You'll receive a generous severance package, Larry. We have recommendations ready, contacts in the industry. I can help you with that personally if you'd like." "No thanks," I replied, never taking my eyes off Brent. "I just want to know one thing. Honestly, who had the idea?" Brent hesitated, but answered. "It was the board's consensus. So it was him." I grabbed my coat, left on the chair, and stopped at the door. "Well, it's been a pleasure working here. Good luck with the 2 interns. I just hope they know how to handle international crises, complex mergers, and multi-million-dollar clients. They're going to need it." Before anyone could say anything, I left. Walking down that hallway, with the eyes of colleagues following me, felt like walking on a bridge about to collapse. Some waved, surprised. Others didn't know how to react. I took the elevator down, each floor a step down the staircase of my silence. At reception, I handed the badge to the security guard, who seemed to already know. "Larry, I'm sorry, man. You were the heart of that place." "Yeah, I thought so too," I replied with a half-smile. Outside, the cold hit me like a slap. The sky still gray, the city still wet. I stood still for a few seconds on the sidewalk, looking at the building that for more than 2 decades I had called my professional home. And in that moment, something changed inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was deeper. It was like an old flame, almost forgotten, had been rekindled again. I knew that moment wasn't the end. Not at all. Because while Brent was reciting his rehearsed lines, while Carla tried to seem human in the face of a cruel decision, something started moving behind the scenes of my mind. Something I had been holding on to for months. Information, contacts, and suspicions. Because I already knew that this was just the beginning. The days following my departure from Titan Core Solutions were a mix of strangeness and freedom. Waking up without having to put on my usual gray suit, without looking at my phone in panic with pending emails, without dealing with endless meetings. It seemed, at first glance, like a well-deserved rest. And that's exactly what I let everyone believe. My friends, longtime colleagues, and even neighbors called or sent messages filled with concern. Everyone asked the same thing. "So what now, Larry? What are you going to do?" I responded with the same light, carefree tone. I think it's time to take care of myself a bit. Take my foot off the accelerator, maybe travel. Visit my sister in Denver, 22 years without a real vacation." It was convincing enough, but the truth was different. While the surface seemed calm, under the water, there were currents that only I felt. I wasn't resting. I was making plans. Moving pieces on the board. A few days after my dismissal, I received an encrypted message from an old contact, Miranda Clark, Chief Operating Officer of Novavox Technologies, Titan Core's biggest rival in the corporate logistics systems industry. She was smart, cold, direct to the point. We'd crossed paths several times over the years, almost always as opponents in multi-million-dollar bids. But there was mutual respect. She knew who I was. She knew what I was capable of. The message simply read, "We need to talk. You have too much information and strategic insight to stay idle. Novavox wants to hear from you." My heart raced. That was the signal. The corporate world, so cruel and indifferent on the surface, has its own underground whispers. And there, in the shadow of my dismissal, I realized how valuable I still was. 2 days later, in a discreet cafe on a quiet street in downtown Detroit, I met Miranda. She arrived on time, as always, dressed in black with a tablet in hand and a look that mixed calculation and urgency. "Larry," she said, extending her hand firmly, "I'm sorry for what happened to you. But honestly, it was the best thing that could have happened to us. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Expand on that, please. Brent made the biggest mistake of his life. You were the tactical brain behind Titan Core, we know that. And now, we have a unique window of opportunity. They're vulnerable, the market is unstable, and you know the behind the scenes of that company better than anyone. She slid the tablet toward me. On it, a complete dossier. Novavox's expansion plans, ongoing projects, areas that urgently needed restructuring. But what caught my attention the most was a comparative graph. They were growing, but they could grow much more. And there, in the fine print, was my name. Are you offering me a position? She nodded. Chief Strategy Officer. You go straight to the board. Full autonomy to restructure our operational core. Budget approved. Salary, well above what you were making before. And a generous performance-based bonus. I looked at her for a long moment. The offer was tempting, but I wanted more than just a seat in another company. I wanted to rebuild, reform, redefine. I accept, I finally replied, but with one condition. What? Give me full authority to build my own team. I want to bring some people with me. Some from the outside, and some from within Titan Core itself. People who don't know they need a fresh start yet. She smiled. For the first time, a genuine smile. You're more ruthless than I remembered. I learned from the best, I replied, with a touch of irony. Joining Novavox was quick and strategic. No formal announcement, nothing in the press. For weeks, I kept pretending I was on a sabbatical, posting generic pictures of books, coffee, and walks. While behind the curtains, I immersed myself in the numbers, the system flaws of the competition, the weaknesses where Titan Core was vulnerable. I gathered the team. I restructured departments with agility. I created a new logistics innovation core focused on predictive intelligence, something Brent always considered an unnecessary expense. In 3 months, our client portfolio grew by 40%. In 5, we secured a $1 billion international contract with a transportation company on the East Coast. Novavox's stock price soared. The company's name started circulating in business magazines with bold headlines. Novavox reinvents itself and threatens Titan Core's reign. New brain behind the turnaround. Sources say Larry Swinford is back in the game. It was just the beginning, and the market was feeling it. But even with the growing success, a part of me remained silent, a kind of calculated silence. I didn't appear at public events. I didn't give interviews. Internally, they knew my position, but the world still speculated. Until one Wednesday afternoon, while reviewing a report in my new office with a view of the Detroit River, the phone rang. The number was familiar, too old to be a coincidence. I answered. Hello? On the other end, a tense, almost unrecognizable voice. Larry, it's Brent. And that's when the phone rang. It was him. Larry, please, we need to talk. The voice on the other end of the line was different. It was still Brent Edwards, but something had changed. The usual arrogance had given way to a trembling, hesitant, almost pleading tone. It was like hearing an old castle crumble in slow motion. And I, sitting in my leather chair at Novavox headquarters, let the silence linger for a few seconds before responding. Brent, it's been a while. I know it's strange for me to call like this, but the truth is things here have gotten complicated. Very complicated. Pride. The same pride that months ago had made him look me in the eye and tell me that 2 juniors would do my job for 1/3 of the cost. The same pride that led him to dismiss me as if I were just an old replaceable cog in a machine. Now, that pride was bleeding over my phone line. Complicated how? I asked with the tone of someone who genuinely wanted to understand. Inside, every word from him was music. Titan Core is on the decline. Productivity is down. We've lost some major contracts. And well, the board wants changes. Fast. There were noises in the background, nervous voices, perhaps an emergency meeting. Brent seemed to be speaking from a more secluded corner, maybe even hidden. So, What exactly did you call me for? I let the question slip as if the answer wasn't already written between the lines. We want you back, Larry. I want you back. Look, I know what happened was a mistake, but the company is willing to make it right. We'll double your salary, guaranteed performance bonuses, executive car, new office, whatever it takes. I stood up, walking over to the window. The late afternoon sun painted the Detroit sky in orange hues. Down below, the world went on, oblivious to the twist unfolding on that call. Brent, I began, with a controlled sigh. I spent 22 years there. I gave everything, every project, every quarter change. And when it came time to look me in the eyes and be fair, you replaced me with 2 kids who could barely turn the system on without my help. He went silent, and I let that silence grow, like a crack in concrete. I understand, Larry, he finally said, almost swallowing his words. It was a difficult decision, but necessary. Times have changed, the pressures. It's not about the pressures, Brent. It's about the choices. You chose to dismiss me because you thought I was disposable, and now you're calling me because you've realized otherwise. There was a muffled sound, maybe a fist banging on a table. His patience was wearing thin. I knew that sound. Brent was the type who didn't handle regret well. Never did. Fine, he said, trying to regain control. Let me rephrase. This isn't about the past. It's about what we can still build. With you here, we still have a chance. We can turn this around. You're the only one who can reorganize the operations in time. Larry, we need you. That last phrase, we need you. It sounded so strange coming from him, like an old lion asking for help from the prey it once nearly devoured. But what he didn't know, and what made my inner smile grow, was that I was already building something much bigger, something he couldn't imagine. Brent, I really appreciate the offer, but now I need time. Time for myself. To rest. To take care of my health, my family. You understand, don't you? On the other end, he hesitated. The swallowed pride hurt more than any stock market crash. I understand, he said finally in a softer voice. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. I hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at my phone for a few seconds as if it still carried the echo of Brent's voice. Then I set the phone down on the table and returned to the report I had been reviewing before the call. But that conversation affected me, not out of doubt, but out of confirmation. I was right all along. Brent hadn't dismissed me just for cost cutting. It wasn't just a cold business decision. That had been a calculated move. A game. And now with his company on the brink of collapse, he was desperately seeking a key piece that he himself had thrown away. The problem was, that piece had already found a new board. I remembered something I had discovered weeks ago. An internal report that one of my contacts still at TitanCore had managed to get me. Something hidden in the compliance systems, buried under a layer of access permissions that only a CEO would have. And what was in there was serious. Fraud, contract manipulation, embezzlement through phantom subsidiaries. And most interestingly, the dates matched exactly with the period when I was removed. It was as if my departure had been the last obstacle before that scheme was put into motion. But Brent made a mistake. He thought I was just a loyal employee, someone who would retire quietly. He didn't know that, even outside the company, I still had eyes. And what those eyes saw could destroy everything, because I knew exactly what Brent was trying to hide. Novavox breathed a different air. From the very first day I walked into that mirrored building in the heart of Detroit, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not the idle freedom of someone with no obligations, but the creative freedom of someone who is heard, respected, valued. It was early autumn when I signed my contract with them. CEO Ethan Miles personally welcomed me in the 42nd floor meeting room, where the skyline seemed to say that anything was possible. I clearly remember the firm handshake, the honest smile, and his first words, Larry, we're tired of losing to Titan Core. We want to turn this game around. And you're our most important piece. Those words weren't courtesy, they were commitment. I came in full force. We overhauled the entire operations structure, replanned product lines, and created an internal innovation program to bring engineers' ideas to life. But most importantly, I promoted good people. People who had been overlooked for years, just like I had been. And they repaid me with loyalty and performance. The effect was chain reaction. In 3 months, the charts were up. In 6, we surpassed the annual forecast. In 9, Novavox broke historic records for stock market growth. This is just the beginning, I said during one of the board meetings while presenting the data for the new expansion campaign. Titan Core is stagnating. The market is watching us. It's now or never. And they trusted me. Truly. Not with vague promises and catchy phrases like I used to hear at Titan Core, but with autonomy, resources, and the rarest of all, recognition. When Business Frontline magazine named me Strategic Executive of the Year, Ethan called me for a private conversation. Larry, I know what you went through. Brent Edwards cost us major contracts for years, but honestly, what he did to you was the best move he ever made. Just not for his team, for ours. We laughed, but there was more truth than joke in that statement. Meanwhile, rumors about Titan Core started circulating. Stories of payment delays, talent exodus, shelved projects. The financial press speculated, but no one had concrete data. Until one day, on a gray Wednesday morning, I received an email. The sender was anonymous. Subject, you need to see this. No signature, no context. Just an encrypted attachment with the phrase, "It's time to show who he really is." I thought twice before opening it. But something inside me, maybe the same instinct that made me reject Brent's request, pushed me forward. I unzipped the file and came face to face with a sea of PDFs, spreadsheets, and screenshots. It looked like a complete dossier. And as I read, the pieces began to fit. Transfers disguised as external consultancies, contracts signed with ghost companies linked to hidden partners, and his name. Always his name. Brent Edwards. Son of a, I murmured, a lump growing in my throat. But there was more. In one of the spreadsheets there was a note with my old employee ID at Titan Core, a code linked directly to the audit team. I discovered that, until the day of my dismissal, I had access to a system that tracked inconsistencies in supplier contracts, the same system that coincidentally had its access revoked minutes after I left. I was the obstacle, the only person with enough technical knowledge and history to identify the scheme. And that's why I was discarded. That was it. The truth. Laid bare. I sat for a while, staring at the screen, processing. It wasn't just about business, it was personal. I had been eliminated as a risk. And now, even with Novavox soaring high, with my name on magazine covers and my projects reverberating across the industry, that hurt. But it also gave me something new. Clarity. Ethan, I called, entering his office. We need to talk. It's about Titan Core, and what comes next. He looked at me seriously, and I slid the laptop across the desk. With a click, the anonymous file opened before him. This changes everything, he said, without taking his eyes off the screen. And how it changed. In that moment I realized that Novavox's rise was not the end of my story. It was just the middle. Because now, the truth was starting to leak out. And soon, very soon, the whole world would find out. It was an anonymous email, and everything made sense. The silence that precedes the fall is always the cruelest. It doesn't warn, it doesn't shout. It simply hovers, like a dense fog over a field where something is about to crumble. Just a few weeks after the anonymous email revealed Brent Edwards' underworld to me, the first pieces started to fall. Not in headlines, not in public scandals, not yet. But behind the scenes, within the offices of Novavox, where Ethan and I met with a discreet legal team specializing in corporate crimes. "This isn't just embezzlement," said Marla, the lawyer leading the document analysis. "It's a chain of organized fraud, fake contracts, money laundering through non-existent consultancies, and more seriously, forged signatures. There's one here, Larry, in 2 documents you've never seen." I took a deep breath. This was no longer just a matter of wounded pride. It was an assault on my integrity. And if he forced my departure because of this, then he knew exactly what he was doing, I said, unable to hide the anger boiling in the back of my voice. Ethan crossed his arms and spoke with the cold calm of someone who won't tolerate dishonesty. "We're going to bring him down." Precisely, without fanfare. Justice doesn't need to make noise to be done. And so began what would later be known, months later, as the quiet implosion of Titan Core Solutions. Novavox activated an alliance of companies impacted by the fraudulent contracts. Together they filed lawsuits, the SEC was notified, the IRS received robust tips, and within 3 months, a federal investigation was launched. Without any direct involvement from me, by legal recommendation, my role had only been to light the fuse. And meanwhile, on the outside, Titan Core was collapsing. Stocks plummeted. The majority shareholders quietly sold their shares. The glass corridors of the company's once imposing old building, the same one where I had entered full of dreams and walked out head held high even though I was shattered, now echoed empty. Brent tried to resist. The press sought him out. He smiled in front of the cameras with rehearsed speeches. "The changes are part of the growth cycle," he said. "We're repositioning in the market." But it was a lie, and everyone knew it. Until one morning I received a call. Restricted number. "Larry?" It was his voice. "Brent." I stayed silent for a few seconds. "Surprised you can still sleep, Brent." He hesitated, then let out a heavy sigh. "I made mistakes. I thought you were too good, too smart. And that scared me." "No. You were afraid of being discovered, and to do that you had to erase me." "I was wrong," he repeated almost pleadingly. "But now, it's all over. Titan Core is filing for bankruptcy. They've taken me off the board. The lawyers, they're everywhere." I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. For a moment I felt something strange. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't anger. It was mourning. "Brent, I don't wish ill on anyone. But every decision has a price. And you paid yours." He didn't respond. He simply hung up. And that sound, the dry tone of the call ending, was the final punctuation of a story he wrote himself with arrogance. In the following months, the Titan Core case became a feature in investigative programs. Headlines like, "Ex-CEO involved in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme dominated feeds." Brent was formally accused. And, ironically, some of the evidence used against him were documents I had filed years ago and were now in the hands of authorities. As for me, I moved forward. Novavox was exploding with growth. I received an honorary plaque at a national event, and the CEO took the stage to call me the strategic heart of the company's new era. I smiled, discreetly, but inside, those words healed old wounds. One night after a meeting in Chicago, I sat alone on the hotel balcony looking at the illuminated city. I had a glass of whiskey in my hand, and my eyes turned toward the sky. I thought about everything. The sleepless nights at Titan Core. The times they told me I wasn't the right type to rise. The solitary lunches. The promotions given to others for political reasons. The final meeting with Brent, where I was discarded like an old piece. And everything that followed. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was justice. The silent kind. The one that doesn't need applause because its strength lies in coherence, in truth, and in the peace it leaves. The last time I spoke publicly about the case was in an interview for a business magazine. "Mr. Swinford, what's the greatest lesson from this journey?" I smiled sincerely. "The lesson is simple. Companies are made of people, and people aren't numbers. When you treat talents as disposable, what you lose is not just an employee, it's the soul of the company. And without soul, no organization survives. The reporter nodded, scribbling furiously. And Novavox? What did they do differently? They listened to me. They trusted me. They gave me space to be who I am. And when leaders do that, when they see people, not just roles, everything changes. I took a deep breath. The wind passed gently across the balcony. Down below, the city was alive. And for the first time in many years, so was I. Because sometimes justice doesn't need a stage, it just needs time.